The need to build institutional trust also remains crucial in addressing the challenges facing conflict-affected areas in Africa. Elhadj SC, a member of the governing board at Interpeace, says with over 85% of the population in Africa living in these conflict areas, it is not normal. He spoke to CNBC Africa early on the sidelines of the ongoing Africa Resilience Forum. Take a listen.
This is an observation and an analysis of a reality on the continent nowadays, that 85% of population in Africa is living in conflict-affected area, either in a country that is deeply in a conflict situation or at the border of such a country. And given the fact that many of those shocks and hazards are cross borders, we are having also a population across countries that are suffering from it. This is a situation that I call a situation which is not normal, because having such a number, which is the majority of our population, in such a context, and then take it for granted and try to do something in the midst of it, it is not normal. Of course, we cannot start talking about the relevance of such a forum before calling for what is most important, that is leaders at all levels and all actors to use their influence to stop the conflicts, to stop the wars, to create a sense of normalcy so that people recover not only their livelihood and their livestock, but to recover what is most important to all of them, which is their human dignity, without which we will not have the long-term peace that we would like to see happening. But beyond that, until that is really happening, we need to work in those contexts, and then bearing in mind the realities of the challenges that the populations are facing. And the entry points for that are so many. Some work in humanitarian, because the shocks and hazards are so deep that people need to get to the basic kind of facilities and commodities, as basic as access to water, to access to sanitation, and then health, and of course, protection of those who are most vulnerable and are in greatest need. But at the same time, people are also working in development areas to try to build some kind of infrastructure that can be used on the longer term. Private sector is investing or doing business in such situations and in areas, but then we should make sure that all that we are doing should be contributing to solving problems, should be part of solutions and not be the problem in themselves. And that means that, we have to make sure that our approach is peace sensitive, and we make sure also that we pass the peace test. And in order to do that, we need the kind of partnerships that are required, also to join our efforts and then bring in the resources that are needed and have the infrastructural base in terms of health, in water, in sanitation.
Yeah, I like how you've painted this picture and how crucial this solving this challenge is for the progress of the continent. But for me, I'd like to say finances are the heart of the solution of this problem, and being able to get that investors buying into asset classes that are being formulated to address this challenge. What has that journey been like?
No, it will be like building a trust that is eroded, trust in institutions. And in order to do that, we have to create an enabling environment that is required for it. And that enabling environment is engaging with local communities first and foremost. And when I talk about leadership, and I was talking about leaders at the beginning, I don't only mean those institutional leaders at government level, but those leaders also at the community level, because they're waking up every day, trying also to develop resilience mechanisms, coping mechanisms, strategies for survival. And these provide a base on which we can build. But that will not happen without trust. And I think what we can do, institutions like ours, Interpeace, many other non-governmental organizations, the African Development Bank, which has a big connection, with member states as well as with the private sector in terms of infrastructure building. So trust will only come if real responses are developed, to real needs. Trust will only come in to when we have promises that we are making, and then we hold to those promises. So I think when we talk about the partnership, that's what it is about. when we talk about the partnership, it is also identifying those real elements, that each of the partners should have in the back of their minds in the design and implementation of their programs. And we also are very clear that none of us alone can do it. And that's the reason why when we talk about, financing for peace, we work as Interpeace on the index, that are advising investors, advising private sectors, advising development actors on how to do it. But it is not enough, just to advise. We have to come together and develop proof of concepts, concrete programs in concrete settings to make it happen. And I think it can be done, in certain areas, and then we build from there to go to scale.
Yeah, because when you look at the development trajectory of the continent, we've been quite through a lot. And even more recently, COVID-19 exposed quite a lot of fragilities across the board for different countries. And then that need to be more proactive on resilience, has come to bear. But for you, what has been the biggest takeaways in terms of conversations that have been had today?
I think you gave a very good examples by mentioning COVID-19. Every shock and hazard, of course, can be a tragedy. It can impact on people, but it does not necessarily have to be a disaster. The fact that it becomes a disaster or not will be pretty much depending on the level of preparedness, the early alert systems that we put in place, the early responses, and the investments we are making on the long term to have the resilience of the populations. To take the examples of COVID, we realized at the time that more than 90% of all the drugs on the continents have been imported. That is not sustainable. In the last 2 years, we have an African Medical Agency that has been set up. In the last 2 years, we're starting having local manufacturing of drugs, in a number of African countries, to start with essential drugs, to go all the way, to vaccines, as well as, more complicated, drugs. So using that, as an opportunity and learning fast, around it, is exactly what we have to do. As far as the climate shocks are concerned, that's exactly what we have to do in terms of how we do conflict prevention and also response. We know, for example, that the Zambezi River will get out of its bed every year. And part of Mozambique, will be flooded, part of Zambia will be flooded. In those places that are flooded, as of very places, where you have, some insecurity issues, where you have what you call the jihadist or all other groups that are infiltrating. So then the same map, that where you have the natural shocks, that is the way you have the conflict, that we have the multiple deprivations that populations are facing. And then we have to use that then as an opportunity, and not only, to sit at the fatality, to prepare early, alert early, respond early. And when we respond, we make sure that we leave in those communities enough capacity that they will be able to withstand the next shock when they come next time around. And COVID has taught us that. Some of the environmental and climate shock have taught us that. We can find the same parallelism, in terms of, conflict prevention and responding to instability. There is nothing, more tragic and more disappointing and hurting, to predict that there will be a conflict, to predict that there will be a famine, and then see it happening. If we are so smart, to have all the knowledge, to see the things happening, then we should also develop the strategies and then the skills required to make sure that they will not happen, in the way that will be disastrous, to the populations, that are counting on us. But if we continue to do shock in, shock out, and then leaving them in the same level of vulnerabilities, we will not get to the level of trust that is required to have the long-term work that I was describing before.